Victoria Langford had never begged for anything in her life. But that Friday night, in a loud bar full of strangers, the most powerful woman in the company reached across the counter, seized a man's wrist, and pulled him close enough to feel her breath. "Take me home," she whispered, "or you're fired." Caleb Johnson went still. He was nobody, a widowed single father, a man who'd buried his wife and his dreams in the same cold ground. But what Victoria didn't know was that this broken stranger would become the only person on earth brave enough to save her. Before we begin, comment below which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe a man can rise from the lowest place to find love again, subscribe right now. The wrist she grabbed belonged to a man who had spent 3 years teaching himself not to feel anything at all. Caleb Johnson didn't pull away. He didn't laugh. He didn't do the thing a normal man might do when a beautiful woman in a $1,000 dress wrapped her cold fingers around his arm and threatened his livelihood in a single breath. He just looked at her. And in that 1 second before either of them said another word, Caleb saw what nobody else in that crowded bar could see. She was terrified. "Did you hear me?" Victoria's voice was steady, but her grip wasn't. Her fingers were trembling against his skin just slightly, the way a man's hand shakes when he's lifting something far too heavy and refuses to admit it. "I said take me home. Now." "Ma'am," Caleb said quietly, "you don't even know my name." "I don't need to know your name." "Then you don't need me to take you home." That stopped her. For a half second, the mask slipped. Something flickered behind those gray eyes. Surprise maybe that a man at the bottom of her company had just told the woman at the top of it. No. Let me back up. To understand what happened in that bar, you have to understand the man whose wrist she grabbed. You have to understand that 12 hours before Victoria Langford whispered those words, Caleb Johnson had been on his knees on the kitchen floor of a small apartment on the east side of the city, scrubbing orange juice out of the grout with a toothbrush, because his 6-year-old daughter had spilled her cup at 6:40 in the morning and burst into tears. And he could not. He physically could not leave that mess for later. Because leaving messes for later was how a life fell apart, and Caleb's life had already fallen apart once. "Daddy, I'm sorry," Ava had whispered, her little face crumpling. Hey baby, look at me." He'd dropped the toothbrush and taken her face in both hands, hands that were too big and too rough and too tired. "It's juice. It's just juice. We don't cry over juice in this house, you hear me? We clean it up and we keep going. That's what we do." "That's what we do," she'd repeated, hiccuping. "That's what we do. 3 years. 3 years since the car accident. 3 years since a state trooper had stood on his doorstep at 11 p.m., with his hat in his hands, and 3 years since Caleb had learned that grief is not a wave that crashes once and recedes. Grief is a tenant. It moves in. It pays no rent. It sits at your kitchen table every single morning and stares at you, and the only way to survive it is to get up anyway. Pack a lunchbox anyway. Braid a little girl's hair with hands that have forgotten how to do anything gentle, and go to a job that does not care whether you live or die." His wife's name had been Maya. He didn't say it out loud anymore. Saying it out loud made it real, and real was a luxury he couldn't afford on a Tuesday morning with a school drop-off in 19 minutes. "You got your backpack?" he asked. "Yep." "Lunch?" "Yep." "You got my heart." Ava grinned the gap where her front tooth used to be, making her look like the happiest thing in the world. "Yep, I always got your heart, Daddy." "That's right. Don't lose it." He dropped her at Mrs. Okafor's place, the neighbor who watched Ava before school. And after the closest thing to family they had left in this city, and he drove to the office of Langford Dynamics with a cold cup of gas station coffee and a tie he'd knotted at a red light. Caleb worked in logistics, mid-level. The kind of job where you're important enough to be blamed when something goes wrong and invisible enough to be forgotten when it goes right. He was good at it. He was good at it the way a drowning man is good at holding his breath out of pure grinding necessity. He came in early. He stayed late. He never complained because the men who complained were the men who got cut, and Caleb Johnson could not get cut. Getting cut meant losing the health insurance that kept Ava's asthma inhaler on the bathroom counter. Getting cut meant moving. Getting cut meant telling a 6-year-old that the only home she'd ever known was gone and he would rather die. So he survived, silent, steady, invisible. And then came Friday. Johnson. Hey, Johnson. Marcus from accounting was leaning over the wall of his cubicle, the way Marcus always did, grinning, like a man who'd never lost anything in his life. What? It's Dave's last day. We're all going to McGinty's. Drinks are on the company card. You're coming. I can't. You always say that. Because it's always true. Caleb. Marcus's voice lost some of its goofiness. Man, when's the last time you did something that wasn't work, or that kid? That kid has a name. I know she's got a name. I'm just saying. 1 drink. 1. You go home, you tuck her in, fine. But you've been a ghost around here for 3 years, and people are starting to think you don't like 'em. Caleb almost said no. He had it on his tongue, the no smooth and automatic, the same no he'd been handing out for 3 years like a man passing out flyers. Nobody wanted. But then he thought about Ava. Ava, who was having a sleepover at Mrs. Okafor's that very night. The first sleepover she'd ever begged him for. The first night in 3 years, he'd have an empty apartment and no reason to rush home. He thought about how the apartment would feel. Empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet where grief sat in every chair. 1 drink, Caleb said. Marcus nearly fell over the cubicle wall. He lives, ladies and gentlemen. 1. And I'm driving myself so I can leave when I want. Whatever you say, man. Whatever you say. McGinty's was a downtown bar, the kind of place that had brick walls and Edison bulbs and bartenders who looked like they were 1 bad week from quitting to start a podcast. The after-work crowd was thick. Caleb stood near the back with a beer he hadn't touched, watching his co-workers get loud, laughing at the right times, feeling like a man watching a movie about a life he used to have. That's when he noticed her. She came in alone, which was the first strange thing. Women who looked like Victoria Langford did not arrive alone at bars at 9 p.m. on a Friday. She wore charcoal gray, sharp and severe, the kind of clothing that didn't ask for attention so much as command it. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her face was composed into a mask Caleb recognized instantly, because he wore one just like it every single morning, the mask of a person holding themselves together with both hands. He knew who she was. Everyone knew who she was. Victoria Langford ran the entire company. 40 floors of people answered to her. She was on magazine covers. She was the youngest CEO in the firm's history, and she had a reputation as cold as a meat locker. Efficient, ruthless, untouchable. The kind of boss whose name made middle managers sweat. Caleb had been in the same room as her exactly twice in his life, and both times she had looked through him like he was a window. She didn't look through anyone tonight. She didn't look at anyone at all. She sat at the end of the bar, ordered something amber and neat, and drank it like medicine. Caleb went back to his beer. None of his business. The CEO's private misery was 40 floors above his pay grade, and he had his own. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and the temperature of the room changed. A man walked in. Tall, blonde, expensive. The kind of expensive that's loud about itself. A watch that cost more than Caleb's car. A smile that had never once been told no. He had 2 friends with him, men cut from the same gold cloth, and the moment he saw Victoria at the bar, his whole face lit up with something that was not kindness. Well, 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 the blond man said, loud enough for half the bar to hear. Victoria Langford, drinking alone, on a Friday. Caleb watched her spine go rigid. Hello, Tristan, she said without turning around. Don't get up. The man, Tristan, slid onto the stool beside her, uninvited his friends, fanning out behind him like a wall. I'd hate to interrupt whatever this is. What is this exactly? The most powerful woman in the city nursing a whiskey by herself. There's a sad little story in there somewhere, isn't there? What do you want? To say hello. We were practically family once, remember? Before you decided you were too important for the rest of us. He leaned in, and his voice dropped into something uglier, something only she and the people closest could hear. But Caleb was closer than Tristan realized, and the bar had gone quiet in that way bars do when they smell a fight. You know what people are saying about your numbers this quarter, Vic? They're saying you're slipping. They're saying the Ice Queen's finally cracking. My father says the board's getting nervous. Your father can... My father. Tristan cut her off, and now there was steel under the smile, is going to own half of what you built by Christmas. And you're going to be sitting in a bar exactly like this one alone, wondering where it all went. You were always going to end up alone, Victoria. You're not built for anything else. Cold things don't get to be loved. They just get to be left. Caleb watched her hand tighten around her glass until the knuckles went white. He watched her open her mouth and find nothing in it. Nothing. This woman who ran 40 floors, who'd never lost an argument in a boardroom in her life, sat there in front of a man who knew exactly where her wounds were, and she had no words. Because there are no words for that. Caleb knew. Caleb knew there are no words for the cruelty that comes from someone who used to love you. And then Tristan delivered the killing blow. He raised his voice, made it carry, made it a performance for the whole crowded bar. Tell me, Vic, is there anyone? Anyone at all? Or are you going home alone again tonight, like you do every night? Come on, show everyone the man who could possibly love Victoria Langford. I'll wait. The bar was silent. People were watching now. Some with their phones half raised, the vultures already smelling blood, already thinking about the video, the post, the caption. Langford. Dynamics CEO humiliated in downtown bar. Caleb could see it forming in real time, the public destruction of a human being, and the thing that struck him, the thing that put down his beer and lifted him out of his chair. Before his brain caught up with his body, was that nobody was going to help her. 40 floors of people answered to this woman, and not one of them was in this bar to stand between her and the wolf. Caleb didn't decide to walk over. His legs decided. The same legs that knelt on kitchen floors and scrubbed juice out of grout, the same legs that had walked him to the front of a church 3 years ago to bury the only woman he'd ever loved. They carried him across that bar, and before he understood what he was doing, he was standing beside Victoria Langford with his hand on the back of her stool, and he heard a voice that turned out to be his own, say, "Sorry I'm late, baby. Traffic was hell." The whole bar turned. Victoria turned too. Her gray eyes locked onto his. Wide, startled, a flash of pure, "Who are you?" And Caleb held her gaze and let his face do the thing his face hadn't done in 3 years. He smiled at her like he loved her. "You order me a drink yet?" he said gently. Or were you waiting? For one terrible second, he was sure she'd blow it. He was sure she'd recoil. Call security, say, "I don't know this man," and he'd be fired and humiliated and on the street, and Ava's inhaler would be the price of one stupid impulse. But Victoria Langford did not get to be the youngest CEO in the firm's history by being slow. "I was waiting," she said. And she reached up and took his hand off the back of the stool and laced her fingers through his like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You're always late." Tristan's smile cracked right down the middle. "And who," he said, "is this?" "This," Victoria said, and her voice had found itself again steel and silk, "is none of your business. But since you asked Tristan, meet the man who actually shows up for me. Something you never managed." Caleb felt her grip tighten on his hand, a desperate squeeze under the table, and he understood it for what it was. A prayer. Please. Please don't let go. He didn't let go. "I think we've met," Caleb said, looking Tristan dead in the eye. He had no idea where the words were coming from. 3 years of swallowing everything, 3 years of silence, and it all came out now, calm and low and certain. "You're the one she talks about. The ex." He let that sit. "She doesn't talk about you the way you think she does." A muscle jumped in Tristan's jaw. "Is that right?" "That's right." "And what do you do exactly?" "You don't look like our usual crowd." "No," Caleb agreed. "I don't. I work for a living." Somebody at the bar laughed. A short, surprised bark of a laugh. And just like that, The room turned. The same room that had been ready to watch Victoria die was suddenly on the side of the quiet man in the cheap tie who'd walked over and stood his ground. Tristan stood. His friends shifted behind him. For a second, Caleb thought it might come to something physical and some old buried part of him, the part that grew up on the east side, the part that knew how a man stands when he means it, went very calm and very ready. But Tristan was a coward. Cowards always are underneath the watches and the smiles. He buttoned his jacket and pulled his lips back into something that was trying to be a smile. "Enjoy your evening," he said. "Both of you, truly." And to Victoria lower, "We'll talk about your numbers Monday, you and the board. Bring your little friend." Then he was gone, his wall of men flowing out the door behind him. The bar slowly exhaled. The phones came down. The crowd lost interest the way crowds do, hungry for blood, and then bored the moment it's denied. Within a minute the noise was back, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the ordinary cruelty of a Friday night moving on, as if nothing had happened. Caleb let go of her hand. He stepped back. "You're okay," he said. "He's gone." And that's when Victoria Langford looked up at him with something he would never forget. And instead of saying thank you, instead of saying anything, a normal, grateful person might say, she reached out and grabbed his wrist. Hard fingers digging in, and she pulled him close and whispered the words that would change both their lives. "Take me home, or you're fired." So now you understand. Now you know what he saw when he looked at her. Not arrogance, not power drunk on its own reflection. Desperation, the whole performance, the steel, the silk, the none of your business had cost her everything she had. And the second the audience was gone, the woman underneath was a hairline fracture away from coming apart, and the only thing holding her together was the cold fingers around a stranger's wrist. "Ma'am," Caleb said quietly, "you don't even know my name. I don't need to know your name." "Then you don't need me to take you home." That stopped her. The mask slipped just for a moment, and what was underneath was so naked and so familiar that Caleb's chest ached because he saw himself in it, the kneeling on the kitchen floor self, the holding it together with both hands self. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice broke on the second word, a tiny crack she immediately tried to patch. I cannot be alone right now. Do you understand me? If I walk out of this bar by myself, and I get into a car by myself, and I go home to that apartment by myself." She stopped, swallowed. "Please, I don't have anyone else. I've never had anyone else. That's his whole point. Don't you see? He's right. That's what's so, he's not right." "What?" "He's not right." Caleb pulled a stool over and sat down so he was eye level with her, so she wasn't looking up at a stranger but across at a man. "That guy. Everything he said. He's not right about you, and I think you know it, but it's easier to believe him because you've been told it so long it sounds like the truth. It's not the truth. The truth is, you stood toe-to-toe with somebody who knows exactly how to hurt you, and you didn't run. That's not cold. Cold people don't bleed. You're bleeding all over this bar right now, lady, and you're still sitting up straight while you do it. That's the opposite of cold." Victoria stared at him. In 36 years, nobody had ever talked to her like that. People agreed with her, or they feared her, or they wanted something from her. Nobody sat down at her eye level and told her the truth gently. The gentleness was the part that undid her. She could have armored up against cruelty. She had a whole life's worth of armor for cruelty. She had no armor at all for a stranger being kind. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Caleb Johnson, Logistics 4th floor. I've been with the company 2 years. Something flickered across her face, a dawning, awful realization. You work for me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Oh, God." She put a hand over her mouth. "Oh, God, I threatened to fire you. I grabbed you, in front of oh, God." And now the careful CEO was gone entirely, and she was just a mortified human being. "I am so sorry. Please forget I said any of it. Forget all of it. I'll have HR. No, that's worse. I'll just forget the whole thing happened. I'll go home. I'll be fine. I'm always fine." She stood up too fast, grabbed her bag, dropped it, and her hands were shaking too badly to pick it up. Caleb picked it up for her. He held it out, and he didn't let go when she grabbed it, so for a second they were both holding it, and he said, "I'll take you home." "You don't have to. I'm not going to let you drive like this. And I'm not going to let you go home alone like this either. Not because you're my boss. Not because you threatened my job, and lady, that was a hell of a thing to threaten a single dad with. By the way, we're going to talk about that. But because 3 years ago, I was where you are right now, and the one thing I needed and didn't have was one person who'd just sit with me so I didn't have to be alone with it. So, I'll take you home. We'll sit. You don't have to talk. And tomorrow, you can fire me, or forget me, or whatever you want, but tonight you're not going to be alone." Victoria Langford, who had not cried in front of another human being in 11 years, felt her eyes fill and burn. "Why," she managed, "would you do that for me?" Caleb thought about it. He thought about Maya and the church and the empty chairs at the kitchen table. He thought about a state trooper with his hat in his hands. He thought about all the people who'd said, "I'm so sorry for your loss," and then gone back to their lives, and the very few who had actually stayed. "Because somebody should have done it for me," he said simply. "And nobody did. So now I do it for other people. It's the only thing that ever made the math work." They walked out of McGinty's together. Caleb texted Marcus a quick heading out, "See you Monday," and ignored the 17 winking emojis that came back. Outside, the night air was cool, and Victoria pulled her coat around herself, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke as they walked toward his car, an 11-year-old sedan with a booster seat in the back and a constellation of Cheerios in the crevices, a car that announced exactly who he was without a single word. Victoria looked at the booster seat through the window. "You have a child. A daughter, Ava. She's 6. And her mother—" Caleb opened the passenger door for her. He held it. He looked at her over the top of it, and he said the thing he hadn't said out loud in months. "Her mother died 3 years ago. Car accident. So it's just us now. Me and Ava." He paused. "That's why I knew what your face was doing in there. I've seen it in the mirror." Victoria got into the car. She sat very still while Caleb walked around and slid into the driver's seat, and she watched his hands on the wheel. Careful hands, scarred hands. A wedding ring conspicuously absent, and a pale band of skin where it used to be. And something in her chest, she'd kept locked for over a decade, made a sound like ice beginning to crack on a frozen lake. "Where do you live?" Caleb asked. She told him. It was the part of the city where the buildings had names and doormen and views. Of course it was. They drove in silence for a while. The city slid by. And then, somewhere around the 7th red light, Victoria spoke without looking at him, her voice so quiet he almost missed it under the engine. "His name was Tristan Vance. We were engaged 5 years ago." She watched the light turn green. "His father is Gerald Vance, Vance Holdings. They're the company that's been trying to buy us out for 2 years, and Gerald is on my board, which means every meeting I run, I'm running it in front of a man who wants me to fail, and a son who—" She stopped. "When I called off the wedding, Gerald told me I'd ruined Tristan's life, and that he'd spend the rest of his making sure I never had a happy one. I thought it was just something a furious father says. It wasn't. It was a plan. They've been at me for years. The numbers Tristan was talking about, they're real. The board is nervous. And if I lose this quarter, I lose the company my mother built, and there is a man in a bar tonight who will laugh about it for the rest of his life." "Why'd you call off the wedding?" Caleb asked. Victoria was quiet for a long time. "Because 3 weeks before it," she said, "I found out he'd never once meant a single thing he'd told me. The love, the future. All of it was a play to get his family closer to mine. I was a merger, he wanted to wear a ring. And the worst part—" Her voice thinned to almost nothing. "The worst part is I didn't even feel heartbroken when I found out. I felt relieved. Because some part of me had always known I wasn't the kind of woman a person actually falls in love with. I was just confirming it. He gave me proof, and I've believed that proof every day since. So when he stood in that bar and said cold things don't get to be loved, they just get to be left—" She finally turned and looked at Caleb. He wasn't being cruel. He was telling me something I already knew. Caleb pulled the car over. He didn't plan to. He just couldn't drive and say what he needed to say at the same time. So he eased the old sedan to the curb on a quiet street, put it in park, and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me," he said. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. Because I don't say things I don't mean, and I never have, and tonight especially, I've got no reason to lie to you. You hear me?" She nodded barely. "That man told you a lie so many times you started saying it to yourself, and now you think it came from inside you. But it didn't. He put it there. The thing about being unlovable, that's not a fact about you. That's a wound somebody gave you. And I know the difference because I've got wounds too, and I know what it feels like when a wound starts talking in your own voice." He leaned in slightly. "You want to know what I saw when I walked across that bar? I saw a woman everybody had decided to watch get destroyed, and not one of the 40 floors of people who answer to her came to stand next to her. And I thought somebody's gotta. So I did. And I'd have done it if you were the meanest boss in the world, because nobody should have to stand in front of a wolf alone. But here's the part you need to hear." He paused. "I'm not standing here 20 minutes later still talking to you because I had to. I'm talking to you because in the car just now, you stopped being a CEO, and you told me the truth, and the truth was the realest thing anybody said to me in 3 years. And real isn't cold. Real isn't unlovable. Real is the only thing that ever gets loved, lady. The fake stuff never had a chance." Victoria Langford, the youngest, CEO in her firm's history, the Ice Queen, the untouchable, put her face in her hands and finally fell apart. Caleb didn't say anything. He'd learned that much. He didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't, and he didn't tell her to stop because stopping was the worst thing a grieving person could do. He just reached over and put one steady hand on her shoulder, the way he'd wished someone had done for him, and he let her cry in the front seat of an 11-year-old sedan with Cheerios in the cup holders until the worst of it passed. When she came up for air, her careful makeup was ruined and her eyes were red, and she looked nothing at all like the woman on the magazine covers. She looked, Caleb thought, like a person, a real one, and realer than the magazine version, somehow more beautiful. "I haven't done that," she said, wiping her face in front of anyone since my mother died. "How long ago was that?" 11 years. 11 years. Caleb shook his head slowly. "You've been holding that the whole time. Holding it is the only thing I know how to do." "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "I know that one too." They sat there a while longer, two people who'd spent years turning themselves to stone so the world couldn't break them, discovering in the cab of an old car that stone breaks too, it just takes longer, and it does it quietly, and it does it alone. "I have a proposal," Victoria said at last, and there was something different in her voice. Now the tears had washed something out of it, but they'd also washed something in. A clarity. The dangerous, brilliant clarity of a woman who solved impossible problems for a living and had just been handed an idea she couldn't unsee. "And before I say it, I want you to know it's insane, and you can say no, and if you say no, I'll drive. You'll drive me home, and we'll never speak of any of this again, and your job is safe regardless. I swear that, on my mother." "Okay," Caleb said warily. "Say it." "The board meets Monday. Gerald and Tristan are going to come at me with everything, the numbers, the merger, all of it. And the story they're going to tell, the story they've been telling, is that I'm a woman who's lost her edge. Cracking, emotional, unstable, alone." She took a breath. "The single most powerful thing I could do, the one thing that would shut down every whisper that would prove Tristan wrong in front of the people who decide my future, is to walk into a room he can't control and show him I'm not the lonely, broken thing he says I am." She turned to face Caleb. "I need a man who can stand next to me and not flinch. I saw you do it tonight. I watched you stare down Tristan Vance in a room full of people and not blink. Do you understand what I'm asking?" "I think," Caleb said slowly, "I'm afraid I do. I want to hire you to be my partner, in public. A relationship, not a real one. An arrangement. You'd accompany me to events. The gala in 3 weeks. A handful of dinners. You'd appear at the office with me where the right people would see. We'd construct it carefully. And in exchange... Stop. Caleb held up a hand. She stopped. You're about to offer me money, he said. I was going to offer you a great deal of money, yes. Don't. Caleb stared out the windshield. If you put money on the table, then I'm exactly what that guy said you were worth tonight. A merger. A transaction. A thing somebody bought to wear at a party. And I won't do that to you, and I won't do it to me, and I sure as hell won't do it in a car that's got my dead wife's daughter's booster seat in the back. Victoria was silent. But, Caleb went on, and he turned to look at her. I'll think about it, the arrangement, not for money, he searched for it, for a reason I can live with. Because I've got a little girl who needs her daddy to keep his job and his health insurance, and you're the one person on earth who can guarantee both. And because, he hesitated, and then said it because tonight was a night for true things. Because I think you and me are the same kind of broken, and I think two people that broke the same way might be the only two people who can actually help each other. That's a reason I can live with. Money isn't. Victoria Langford looked at this man, this widowed father with the cheap tie and the kind eyes and the spine of solid iron, and felt something she had not felt in 11 years, something so foreign she didn't have a name for it. She felt hope. So, she said carefully, is that a yes? Caleb put the car in drive. That's a take you home first, he said. And let me sleep on it. And we both wake up tomorrow and see if this is still the best worst idea either of us ever had. He pulled back onto the road. And whatever we decide, whatever happens Monday, whatever happens with the board, the gala, all of it, you remember one thing for me. Will you do that? What thing? He glanced at her, and the streetlights moved across his face. And for the first time all night, Caleb Johnson smiled a real smile, small and tired and true. Cold things don't get to be loved, he said. But you're not a cold thing. And before this is over, lady, you're gonna believe me, even if I have to say it every single day until you do. The city lights blurred past the windows. Somewhere across town, a 6-year-old girl slept soundly at a sleepover holding her father's heart. And in an old sedan rolling through the dark, two people who had both decided love was a thing that happened to other people drove toward a Monday that would change everything, neither one of them knowing yet that the fake arrangement they were about to build would become the truest thing in either of their lives. Victoria looked out the window, then quietly without looking back at him. Thank you, Caleb Johnson. It was the first time anyone had said his full name like it mattered in 3 years. He held the wheel a little tighter, and he didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. And he drove her home. Monday came the way Mondays always came for Caleb Johnson, too early and with a 6-year-old's foot in his ribs. Daddy, Daddy, it's morning. It is not morning. The numbers say 630. Those are bad numbers. We don't trust those numbers. Ava giggled and bounced harder, and Caleb gave up the way he always gave up, which was to grab her around the middle and pretend to eat her shoulder until she shrieked. He hadn't slept much. He'd lain awake most of the night turning the thing over the arrangement, the worst best idea, the woman crying in his front seat, and he'd come no closer to an answer at 4 in the morning than he had at midnight. You're squishing me, Ava said into his neck. You squished me first, 18 times. I've got the bruises. Tell me about the sleepover. You tell me about the sleepover. I wasn't there. Did you have fun? We made a fort, and Mrs. Okafor let us have pancakes shaped like ears. Ava pulled back to look at him, suddenly serious, in the way only small children can be serious. Did you have fun, Daddy? You went out. Marcus made you. Caleb went still for half a second. Yeah, he said. I had an interesting time. What's interesting mean? It means a lot of stuff happened and I'm still figuring out how I feel about all of it. Ava considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. That's how I feel about broccoli, she decided. He laughed, a real one. surprised out of him, and that was the thing about Ava. The thing that had kept him alive these 3 years, that she could reach into the worst of him and pull out a laugh like a magician pulling a scarf out of a fist. He carried her to the kitchen on his hip, even though she was getting too big to carry, and he made eggs, and he braided her hair, and he did all the ordinary things that made up the architecture of their small surviving life. And the whole time, underneath a question, sat in his chest like a stone. What are you going to tell her? Because that was the part nobody warned you about with a job offer from your CEO that wasn't really a job offer. He wasn't a single man free to make stupid decisions. Every choice he made for two. And the woman in his front seat had been a tornado, and tornadoes did not check whether you had a child sleeping in the next room before they came through. He dropped Ava at Mrs. Okafor's. He drove to the office. And at 8:51 a.m., before he'd even finished his bad coffee, an email arrived in his inbox with a subject line that made his stomach drop. Meeting request Vive Langford, 9:15 a.m. Executive floor. Caleb stared at it. "What's that face?" Marcus said, materializing over the cubicle wall the way he did. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Nothing?" "That's not a nothing face. That's a something face." Marcus: "Saturday you ghosted me with 17 emojis unanswered, by the way, which is rude, and now you've got a face. Did something happen Friday after you left?" Marcus's eyebrows went up and up. "Caleb Johnson, did you—" "Nothing happened?" Caleb closed the email. "I gave somebody a ride home. That's it. End of story." It was, he would reflect later, the single least true sentence he had ever spoken. The executive floor was another world. Caleb had been up there exactly never. The carpet ate the sound of his shoes. The art on the walls cost more than he made in a year, probably more than he'd make in 5. A woman with a headset and a face like a locked door told him to wait, and he waited hat in hands, except he didn't have a hat, so he just stood there with his hands not knowing what to do, feeling like a man who'd wandered into the wrong building. The door opened. "Mr. Johnson, come in." It was her, but it wasn't her, not the woman from Friday night, not the one who'd wept in his car. This was the magazine version, fully assembled, every hair in place. The armor bolted back on so seamlessly that for a disorienting second, Caleb wondered if he'd dreamed the whole thing. He stepped into the office. She closed the door. And the moment it clicked shut, the armor cracked just slightly, just at the edges, and the real Victoria showed through. "Sit," she said. "Please." He sat. "I want to apologize again for Friday," she said, walking around to the other side of an enormous desk. "Properly. In daylight, sober, with both of us in our right minds. What I did to you in that bar was an abuse of my position, and you would be entirely within your rights to report it. I've already drafted a statement to HR documenting that I initiated everything, and that you behaved with complete—" "Stop." She stopped. He'd noticed she did that when he said stop. She stopped. He filed it away. "You don't need to draft anything to HR," Caleb said. "I'm not reporting you. I knew that Friday, and I know it now. So put that away." Victoria sat down slowly. "Why not?" "Because the woman who grabbed my wrist in that bar wasn't trying to hurt me. She was drowning, and she grabbed the nearest thing. People don't get reported for that. They get—" he searched for it, "they get understood. If I'm lucky enough to be the person who understands them." Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the CEO voice had thinned, and the real one came through. "You're a strange man, Caleb Johnson. I've been told. Most people in your position would already have a lawyer." "Most people in my position can't afford a lawyer," Caleb said dryly. "So we make do with telling the truth. It's cheaper." That got the smallest curve out of her mouth, almost a smile gone before it finished. She folded her hands on the desk. "The board meets in 2 hours." "I know. You told me. I've thought about what I asked you in the car. The arrangement. And in the cold light of Monday morning, I've decided it was the desperate idea of a woman who'd had 3 whiskeys and the worst night of her recent life, and I won't hold you to a single word of it. The offer's withdrawn. You can go back to your floor, and we'll both pretend Friday never—" "You're scared." She stopped again. You spent all weekend building the armor back up, Caleb said, leaning forward. And now you're sitting here trying to send me away before I see underneath it again, because Friday I saw underneath it and it terrified you. That's what this is. You're not withdrawing the offer because you came to your senses. You're withdrawing it because you let one person in and it scared you to death, and now you want the door shut again. He paused. Am I wrong? The silence stretched out so long Caleb thought maybe he'd gone too far. How do you do that? Victoria said finally, very quietly. Do what? See it. Just see it. Like there's no wall there at all. Because I've got the same wall? Caleb said. I built mine 3 years ago out of the exact same bricks. So when I look at yours, I'm not seeing a stranger's wall. I'm seeing my own. And I know every place it's weak because I know every place mine is. He sat back. Here's the thing. You can withdraw the offer. That's your right. But don't tell me you're doing it because you came to your senses. Tell me the truth, or don't tell me anything. Victoria stood up. She walked to the window, the enormous window with the whole city laid out below it, and she stood with her back to him, and for a while she didn't say anything at all. My mother built this company from a single rented office, she said at last to the glass. She did it as a woman in this industry in a time when they didn't let women do it. She did it while raising me alone because my father left when I was 4, and she never once let me see her cry about it. Not once. The lesson I learned watching her was that a woman survives by never showing the wound. You armor up, you outwork everyone, you never let them see you bleed, and you build something so undeniable that they have to respect you whether they want to or not. She paused. She died 11 years ago and left it to me. And every single day since I have run this place trying to be the woman she was, and every single day I have been terrified that I'm not. And the one thing I have always known, the one absolute certainty of my life, is that the moment I let someone see the fear, it's over. They smell it. They take everything. That's how it works. And Friday you let me see the fear. Friday I let you see everything. She turned around. And the world didn't end. That's what's been keeping me up. You saw all of it, and the world didn't end. And now I don't know what's true anymore. And I run a company that requires me to know what's true at all times. And you've made it so I don't. And I think that's why I drafted the HR letter and rewrote the offer and decided to send you away. Because you're dangerous, Caleb Johnson. You're the most dangerous thing that's walked into this building in 11 years. And it's not because of anything you did. It's because of what you saw. Caleb absorbed that. Can I tell you what I think? He said. I have a feeling you will regardless. I think your mother was wrong. Victoria's chin came up sharply. Not about everything, Caleb said quickly. Not about the working hard or the building something undeniable. She sounds like she was right about most of it. But the part where you never let anyone see the wound, that part's killing you. I can see it killing you from across this desk. Because a wound you never let anyone see is a wound that never gets to heal. It just sits there. For 11 years, getting infected. And you call it strength, but it's not strength. It's just a slow way of bleeding out where nobody can watch. He stood up too now, so they were facing each other across the room. My wife used to say something. She said the strongest thing a person can do isn't to never need help. It's to let somebody help you and not hate them for seeing you need it. That was the strongest thing. And it took me 3 years and a whole lot of nights on the kitchen floor to understand she was right. You talk about her like she's still here. Some days she is, Caleb said simply. Some days, the only way I get through is to ask myself what she'd say. And you know what she'd say about Friday night, about all of this. What? She'd say that poor woman's been carrying it alone for 11 years. Caleb and you of all people know what that does to a person. So don't you dare let her shut the door just because she's scared. You go help her whether she likes it or not. That's what we do. Caleb's voice caught just slightly on the last 3 words. That's what we do. It's what I tell my daughter every morning. We don't quit on people. We don't leave them on the floor. We clean it up and we keep going, and we don't do it alone. Victoria Langford looked at this man standing in her office in a tie that had clearly been tied at a stoplight, quoting his dead wife at her, and she felt the wall, the 11-year wall, the wall her mother had taught her to build, develop a crack she could not seal. "The offer," she said. "The arrangement. You're saying you'll do it. I'm saying I'll do it on two conditions, and neither one of them is money. And if you offer me money again, I walk out that door and we really do pretend Friday never happened." "What conditions?" "1. This stays out of my daughter's life until I decide otherwise. She's 6. She lost her mother. I am not bringing a fake girlfriend/secret CEO arrangement into that little girl's world to confuse her. And the day it starts to confuse her, I'm out, no notice, no apology. Ava comes first. Ava always comes first. That's not negotiable, and it never will be." "Agreed. Completely. What's the second?" Caleb walked toward her. He stopped a respectful distance away, but he held her eyes the whole way, and when he spoke, his voice was low and steady. 2. Somewhere in all the staged dinners and the office appearances and the gala and the show, we're going to put on for Gerald Vance and the board somewhere in all that fake. You let me keep doing the real thing. The thing from the car. You let me actually help you. Not the CEO. You. The one who's been alone since her mother died. Because I'll wear a suit and hold your hand at a party. I'll do that. I'm good at pretending I've been pretending I'm fine for 3 years. But I won't spend 3 weeks next to a drowning person and just perform a relationship while she drowns. If I'm in for the real one too. The healing. The hard part. Both of us. He paused. Deal or no deal? Victoria stared at him. You want to fake a relationship? She said slowly, and have a real friendship inside it. I want to help you not be alone, Caleb said. And I'll take whatever container that comes in. Fake girlfriend secret arrangement business deal. I don't care what we call it on the outside. On the inside, it's two broke the same way people keeping each other off the floor. That's the deal. That's the only deal I'll take. For a long moment, Victoria didn't move, and then she did something neither of them expected. She crossed the last of the distance between them, and she put out her hand not to grab his wrist this time, not desperate, but offered palm open the way you offer a hand to seal a thing between equals. Deal, she said. Caleb took it. They shook. And it was such a strange formal little gesture, two people shaking hands on an agreement to save each other, that something in both of them broke loose at the same time. And Victoria laughed an actual laugh, surprised and bright, and entirely unlike the woman from the magazine covers. We're insane, she said. You know that. This is insane. Oh, it's completely insane, Caleb agreed. It's the most insane thing I've ever done, and I once tried to assemble a bunk bed at midnight with no instructions. But here's the thing about insane. He let go of her hand. Sane wasn't working for either of us. So. The intercom on her desk buzzed. The locked door woman's voice came through crisp and bloodless. Ms. Langford, the board is assembling. Mr. Vance, both Mr. Vances have arrived. The light went out of the room. Caleb watched it happen, watched the armor slam back down over Victoria's face plate by plate, and this time he understood it for what it was. Not coldness, but a woman putting on the gear before she walked into a fire. That's my cue, she said. The CEO voice was back. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We'll begin the arrangement this week. My assistant will send you details. Dinner, Thursday. The gala's in 3 weeks. There will be a great deal of preparation. You'll need clothes. Don't argue with me about the clothes. That's not money. That's a costume. A costume is a business expense, and you'll let me cover it, or the entire thing falls apart at the door. I'll allow the clothes, Caleb said, reluctantly. Good. She picked up a leather folder off the desk, squared her shoulders, became entirely the woman the world feared. But at the door, with her hand on the handle, she stopped, and she looked back at him, and for 1 second, the armor opened just enough to let him see the person inside. Caleb. Yeah. When you go in there... She stopped herself. No. I'm going in alone. That's the point. I have to go in alone. They can't see us yet. Not like this. It's too soon. It has to be staged correctly, or it means nothing. She straightened. But I want you to know, walking in there today, knowing there's one person in this building who's seen the real thing and didn't run. It's the first board meeting in 11 years I'm not walking into completely alone. She opened the door. I didn't know that would make a difference. It does. Thank you. And she was gone down the silent hallway into the fire. Caleb stood in the empty office for a moment. Then he found his own way back to the elevator, back down to the 4th floor, back to his cubicle and his cold coffee and Marcus's waiting eyebrows. Well, Marcus demanded, what did the Queen want with you? You're not getting fired, are you? Tell me you're not getting fired. I'll lose my mind. Who'll I talk to? I'm not getting fired. Then what? Marcus. Caleb sat down heavily. If I tell you something, do you swear on your mother you won't repeat it to a living soul in this building? Marcus's eyes went huge. He pulled a chair over. On my mother, on my mother's mother, on all the mothers. What? Caleb looked at him. And then he decided that a man could not do a thing this insane completely alone, and that of all the people in the building, the goofy accountant with the loud laugh had been the only one to drag him out of his cave in 3 years, and that counted for something. You can't tell anyone, Caleb said, especially not in the next 3 weeks. There's a thing happening. With the gala, with me, and I might need help. He told him. Most of it. He left out the crying in the car because that part belonged to her and not to a story. But he told him about the bar and Tristan and the arrangement, and by the end of it, Marcus was sitting back in the chair with his hand over his mouth like a man watching a building collapse. Caleb, Marcus whispered. Caleb, you okay? First of all, this is the best thing that has ever happened in the history of this company. Second of all, you have lost your entire mind. Third of all, he leaned in. Do you like her? It's not like that. I didn't ask what it's like. I asked, do you like her? Marcus, the woman is my boss. She's a billionaire. She's got a guy trying to take her whole company, and I've got a 6-year-old and a car held together with prayers. It can't be. It's not like that. That's a lot of words, Marcus observed, for a man who could have just said no. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. He thought about the way she'd laughed in her office, the real one, the bright one. He thought about her hand offered palm open across the room. He thought about how he'd driven her home Friday and stayed an hour after she was safely inside, just sitting in his car at the curb because he hadn't wanted to drive away yet, and he'd told himself it was because he was tired, and he'd known even then that it wasn't because he was tired. It's not like that, he said again more quietly, and they both heard that he didn't mean it. 2 floors up, the truth was that Victoria Langford was not thinking about Caleb Johnson at all, because Victoria Langford was in a knife fight. The numbers speak for themselves, Victoria. Gerald Vance sat at the far end of the long table, silver-haired patient, as a glacier, the kind of man who'd learned that you didn't have to raise your voice when everyone in the room was already afraid of you. Down 11% this quarter, down 8% the quarter before. The market's moving, and this company isn't moving with it. The board has a fiduciary duty to ask hard questions, and I'd be failing that duty if I didn't ask the hardest one. He folded his hands. Are you the person to lead this company into the next 5 years? Or are you the person your mother left in charge because she ran out of time to find someone better? The table went silent. Someone's pen clicked. Tristan, seated beside his father, did not bother to hide his smile. And Victoria Langford, who 11 years of armor had built for exactly this moment, did the thing she always did. She did not let them see the wound. She opened her own folder, and she met Gerald Vance's eyes, and she began to dismantle him with facts, calmly, precisely the way her mother had taught her, the supply chain restructure that wouldn't show returns until Q3. The 2 contracts in final negotiation that would erase the 11% and then some. The reason the market dip was temporary, and the reason Vance Holdings knew it was temporary, which was the only reason on God's earth they were trying so hard to buy in now, before the recovery at the discount, while she looked weak. You're not worried I'm failing Gerald, she said. You're worried I'm about to succeed, because if this company recovers in Q3 the way my numbers say it will, your window to buy it cheap closes forever. That's what this is. That's what it's always been. You've spent 2 years trying to convince this board I'm cracking because a cracking CEO sells low. I'm not cracking, and I'm not selling." She closed the folder. Anything else? It was, by any measure, a flawless defense. The board shifted. A few of them nodded. Even Gerald inclined his head a fraction the way a chess player nods at a good move. And then Tristan spoke. "It's a wonderful presentation," he said lazily. "Truly, the numbers, the projections, the cool confidence. Very much your mother's daughter." He paused. "There's just one thing the numbers don't cover, and it's the thing the board really wants to know, isn't it? Whether the person at the top is stable, whether she's solid, whether he let it hang, whether she's the kind of person who, say, falls apart in a public bar on a Friday night and has to be carried out by a stranger." The room went absolutely still. Victoria's heart stopped. "I don't know what you're—" "There were people there, Victoria." Tristan's smile widened. "Phones. There always are these days. A woman of your stature in a state like that in public, people talk. People post. And a board making a decision about the future of a company has to wonder, doesn't it, what happens to all those careful projections the next time the Ice Queen has a bad night and there's no stranger around to catch her? He'd done it. In one move, he'd dragged Friday night into the boardroom, and there was nothing in her folder, no number, no contract, no projection on earth that could undo it, because you cannot defend yourself against a wound with a spreadsheet. The thing her mother never taught her was what to do when they came for the wound directly. "Never let them see it," her mother had said. But what did you do when they'd already seen it? Victoria opened her mouth, and for the second time in 4 days, the most powerful woman in the company found nothing in it. The board waited. Gerald watched, patient, glacial. The trap sprung exactly as designed. And then, and Victoria would think about this for a long time afterward, would turn it over and over, into the silence of her own mind walked the memory of a voice. Not her mother's, a different one, low and steady and certain in the cab of an old car at a red light. "That's not cold. Cold people don't bleed. You're bleeding all over this bar right now, lady, and you're still sitting up straight while you do it. That's the opposite of cold." Victoria Langford lifted her chin. "You're right, Tristan," she said. The room flinched. It was the last thing anyone expected. "I had a hard night Friday," she said, and her voice did not shake, and she did not look away from him. "My mother died 11 years ago this month. I run her company every day in her absence, and some days the weight of that is very heavy. And Friday it was heavy. And yes, I went to a bar. And yes, a good man helped me home, and I am not ashamed of a single second of it." She stood. "You want to know if I'm stable? I'll tell you what stable is. Stable isn't a person who never has a hard night. There's no such person, and a board that wants one is a board of fools. Stable is a person who has the hard night and gets up the next morning and comes into this room and defends this company with better numbers than anyone in this building could produce, which is exactly what I've just done while you were busy gossiping about my Friday." She placed both hands on the table. "My mother taught me to never let anyone see me bleed. She was wrong. The strongest thing a person can do is bleed in front of the room and keep standing anyway. So here I am, Gerald, bleeding, standing. Anyone on this board who thinks that makes me weaker than a man who's never had a hard night in his overfunded life, there's the door. Sell your shares. I'll buy them myself." Nobody moved toward the door. The pen clicker had stopped clicking. 2 of the board members were looking at her with something that had not been in their faces 10 minutes ago. And Gerald Vance. Gerald Vance was looking at his son with the cold, contained fury of a man whose weapon had just been turned around and handed back to him with the blade facing the wrong way. The meeting ended without a vote, which in the language of boardrooms was its own kind of verdict. Victoria walked back to her office on legs that had gone watery. The moment the door closed behind her, made it inside, shut the door, and sat down hard in her chair before they gave out entirely. Her hands were trembling. She looked at them trembling on the desk, and she did the only thing that made sense. She picked up her phone and she texted a number she'd made her assistant find that morning. "It's Victoria. I went in alone. But I didn't fight alone. I used your words. They worked." 4 floors down, Caleb's phone buzzed on his desk. He read it. He read it again. And Marcus, watching his face, said, "Okay, that is definitely not a 'gave somebody a ride home' face. That is a whole other face. Who are you texting?" Caleb turned the phone over so Marcus couldn't see, and he typed back slowly with one thumb, a small smile he couldn't suppress pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Told you. You're not a cold thing. 1 down. Now eat something, I bet you skipped lunch." The reply came almost instantly. "How did you know I skipped lunch?" "Because broke the same way people skip lunch when they're scared. Eat. That's an order. You're not the only one in this building who can give those." In her office alone, Victoria Langford looked at her phone and laughed out loud by herself, the bright, real laugh, and then for reasons she could not have explained to anyone, she put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she let 2 tears fall. Just 2, and she did not wipe them away in shame. She realized, not alone. For the first time in 11 years on the worst best Monday of her life, Victoria Langford was not alone. And the strangest part, the part that scared her more than Gerald, more than the board, more than the whole crumbling architecture of her careful life, was that it didn't feel like weakness at all. It felt like the first real breath she'd taken in over a decade. And down on the 4th floor, a widowed father ordered a sandwich he didn't want, and sent a picture of it to prove he was eating too. Because fair was fair, and 2 people who had agreed to fake a relationship to survive a war discovered 3 days in that the only fake thing about it was the part they'd planned. Everything else was already quietly, terrifyingly real. The 3 weeks before the gala were supposed to be a performance. They became something neither of them had a name for. It started with Thursday dinner. Caleb stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 p.m. in the suit her assistant had sent charcoal tailored the most expensive thing he'd ever put on his body, and he tugged at the collar and felt like a fraud. And behind him, Ava sat on the edge of the tub, swinging her legs and offering commentary. "You look like a penguin," she said. "Thank you. That's the look I was going for. Where are you going? You never go anywhere at night. You go to work and you come home, and that's the whole thing." Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with her, the way he'd been eye level with Victoria in that bar, the way he'd learned to be eye level with people who needed the truth handed to them carefully. "I'm going to a work dinner," he said, "with somebody from my job. It's just grown-up work stuff. Boring. You're not missing anything." "Is it a lady?" Caleb went still. 6-year-olds, he had learned, were the most dangerous interrogators on the planet because they asked the questions adults were too polite to ask, and they did it with no agenda but the truth. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you keep checking the mirror," Ava said. "You don't check the mirror for boring work stuff." And there it was, the first crack in the wall he'd promised himself he'd keep between this arrangement and his daughter. He'd told Victoria, "This stays out of my daughter's life until I decide otherwise." He hadn't expected Ava to start deciding for herself within the first week. "It's a work friend," he said carefully. "She's somebody who's having a hard time, and I'm helping her with something. That's all. The way Mrs. Okafor helps us. We help people who are having a hard time. That's what we do." Ava finished satisfied and went back to swinging her legs, and the interrogation was over as fast as it began, and Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But it stayed with him in the car all the way to the restaurant. The look on her face. "Is it a lady?" The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, which Caleb had heard was a saying and had never actually seen until now. Victoria was already there at a corner table, and when she saw him cross the room in the charcoal suit, something flickered across her face that she covered too late for him to miss. "You clean up," she said as he sat down. "Don't sound so surprised. I had a whole life before the cubicle, you know. I wore suits, I shook hands, I was almost respectable." "What changed?" Caleb unfolded his napkin. "Life changed, the way it does." He looked up. "But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to build a story, right? Get our lies straight before the gala. Make sure when somebody asks how we met, we don't say two different things. Right. Victoria pulled out her phone, all business now, and Caleb realized she'd actually prepared notes. Of course she had. I've thought about this. The cleanest cover is closest to the truth. We met through the company. You helped me through a difficult night. We got to talking and discovered we had more in common than either of us expected. Vague enough to be unfalsifiable, true enough that we won't trip over it. We've been seeing each other quietly for about 2 months. We kept it private because of the obvious professional complications. The gala is our soft public debut. 2 months, Caleb said. So we've got 2 months of history to invent. The basics, where we've gone, what I know about you, what you know about me. Enough to survive a hostile dinner conversation with people looking for cracks. Okay. Caleb leaned back. Then let's actually do it. Not the fake version. The real version. Because here's the thing about lying, you can't keep a story straight that's all invented. The good lies are 90% true. So you want to survive the gala, you don't memorize a script. You actually get to know me, and I actually get to know you, and then when somebody asks a question, we don't recite. We just answer, because we'll know. He spread his hands. So, real questions. I'll go first. What's your favorite thing in the world that has nothing to do with the company? Victoria looked at him like he'd asked the question in a foreign language. You don't have one. I have the company. The company is the... Nope. Caleb shook his head. Try again. Not allowed to say the company. One thing. Anything. A food, a song, a place. Something that's just yours that has nothing to do with making money or beating Gerald Vance or proving anything to anybody. One thing that's just for you. Victoria opened her mouth. Closed it. And Caleb watched with something close to heartbreak. A 36-year-old woman genuinely struggled to name a single thing in her life that existed purely for her own joy. She started and stopped. When I was small, before my mother got really sick, before the company got really big, we used to... Her voice did something. Saturdays, she'd close the office and we'd drive out of the city, way out to this diner off the highway that made pie. Terrible coffee. Incredible pie. And she'd let me order whatever I wanted, and we'd sit in this cracked vinyl booth, and she wasn't a CEO, and I wasn't her heir, we were just a mom and her kid eating pie. And on the drive back, she'd let me pick the radio. She stopped. I haven't thought about that in years. I don't even know if the diner still exists. I never went back. After she died, there wasn't time. There was never time. What kind of pie? Caleb said quietly. What kind of pie did you order, when she let you order anything? Victoria blinked. Cherry. Always cherry. She'd order apple and try to trade me a bite, and I'd never let her because cherry was... A sound came out of her that was half laugh, half something else. Cherry was mine. Cherry was yours, Caleb repeated. See? That's the thing. That's a real thing about you, and nobody at that gala knows it, and you almost didn't know it either. That's worth more than 2 months of invented dinners. If somebody asks me at the gala what you love, I'm not gonna say, oh, Victoria enjoys the symphony, like a robot. I'm gonna say, she's got a thing about cherry pie, long story. And I'm gonna smile when I say it, and that smile is gonna sell this whole thing better than any script you could write. Because it'll be true. He paused. That's the play. We make it true. Then we don't have to act. Victoria stared at him across the table, and there was something raw and unguarded in her face, and she said very quietly, You're doing it again. Doing what? The thing where you reach in and find something I forgot I had. She looked down at her hands. I came here tonight with a spreadsheet of cover story logistics, and you've got me crying into the breadbasket about my dead mother's pie. How do you keep I run a 40-floor company? People spend years trying to read me, and they fail. You've known me 4 days. I'm not reading you, Caleb said. Reading you is what Gerald does. He reads you to find the weak spot so he can push on it. I'm not looking for the weak spot. I'm looking for the real spot. They're not the same thing. The real spot is where you're most yourself, and it just happens to be soft, because real things are always a little soft. Gerald sees soft and thinks, weakness. I see soft and think, finally, there she is. He picked up the bread basket and held it out to her. Now eat some bread. You're crying on an empty stomach again, and I've got a daughter who taught me, you can't trust anything anybody says when they're hungry. She laughed wetly and took the bread. And that was how it went. That was how all of it went those 3 weeks. They'd planned to manufacture a fake relationship, and instead, they kept accidentally building a real one, brick by brick, in stolen dinners and texts that started as logistics and turned into something else. She learned that he talked to his dead wife on hard mornings. He learned that she hadn't taken a vacation in 9 years. She learned that he'd given up a promotion 3 years ago because the travel would have taken him away from Ava. He learned that she ate dinner alone at her desk most nights, that she'd done it for so long she'd forgotten food was supposed to be a thing you shared. That's the part that gets me, Caleb said one night on the phone past 11, both of them too wired to sleep. Not the loneliness, the fact that you stopped noticing it. You normalized it. Eating alone every night for years, and not even like it's not even a sad thing to you, it's just Tuesday. It was just Tuesday, Victoria admitted, until you started sending me pictures of your sandwich to make sure I ate. Somebody's gotta. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. A pause. Hey, can I ask you something and you don't have to answer? That's never stopped you before. Tristan, the wedding. You told me he never meant any of it, that you were a merger he wanted to wear a ring. But I've been thinking about it and something doesn't add up. A guy plays a 5-year-long con to marry into your family for the business that's cold, that's calculated. I get it. But the way he looked at you in that bar? That wasn't a businessman who lost a deal. That was a man who got rejected. There's a difference. So which is it? Did he never love you, or did he love you and you left? And now he's spent 5 years pretending it was always a con, so he doesn't have to feel like the one who got left. The line was quiet for a long time. I don't know, Victoria said finally, and her voice was small. I've never let myself think about it that way. It was easier to believe it was all a con. Because if it was a con, then I was right to leave, and there was never anything real to lose. But if he actually... She stopped. If some part of it was real, then I broke something. And I've spent 5 years telling myself I'm the kind of person nobody can love, when maybe the truth is, I'm the kind of person who runs. The second someone gets close. And those are very different problems, Caleb. And only one of them is the other person's fault. Caleb let that sit. He didn't rush to fix it. He'd learned that too. That's a brave thing to say out loud, he said. I've never said it out loud. I know. That's how I know it's brave. A pause. For what it's worth, I don't think you're the kind of person nobody can love. And I don't even think you're the kind of person who runs. I think you're the kind of person who got taught real young that letting someone close is how you get destroyed. And you believed your teacher because you loved her, and now you're a grown woman running a company on a 6-year-old survival rule and wondering why you're lonely. That's not a character flaw, Victoria. That's a kid who never got to unlearn a thing nobody should have had to learn in the first place. The silence on the line stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. Caleb. Yeah. This isn't fake anymore, is it? He closed his eyes in the dark of his kitchen. No, he said. I don't think it is. What do we do about that? I don't know yet. He opened his eyes. But I know we don't lie to each other about it. That was the deal. Real on the inside, whatever it costs. So no, it's not fake anymore. And I don't have a plan for that. And you're my boss, and I've got a daughter who asked me last week if I was going to dinner with a lady, and the whole thing is the most complicated mess I've ever stood in the middle of. A breath. And I'd do it again, every part of it, knowing exactly how complicated it'd get. I'd still walk across that bar. Why? She whispered. You keep asking me that. Because I keep not believing the answer. Then I'll keep saying it till you do, Caleb said. Good night, Victoria. Eat breakfast. I'll know if you don't. He hung up before she could argue, which was the only way to win an argument with her, and he stood in his dark kitchen, with his heart doing something it hadn't done in 3 years, and he was terrified. And underneath the terror was something that felt horribly, wonderfully like being alive. It couldn't last, of course. That kind of thing never does not when there's a Gerald Vance in the world. The crack came 9 days before the gala on a Tuesday in the form of a phone call Caleb took in the office parking garage on his lunch break. "Mr. Johnson?" The voice was older, smooth, glacial. He'd never heard it before, but somehow he knew it instantly. "My name is Gerald Vance. I believe you know who I am." Caleb's stomach dropped. "How did you get this number?" "I make it my business to know things, Mr. Johnson. For instance, I know that 9 days from now you intend to escort Victoria Langford to the Whitmore Foundation Gala as her, what's the word, she's using her partner. I know it's been arranged rather suddenly, and I know a great many things about you that I suspect Victoria does not." A pause designed to land. Caleb Johnson, 32, widower, one daughter Ava, age 6, logistics 4th floor, a position you were nearly let go from 14 months ago during the restructuring before a manager intervened. You drive a 2014 sedan with a lien on it. You've been late on rent twice in the past year. Your daughter's medical needs are covered by the company insurance plan, which is to say by me indirectly. Shall I continue? Caleb stood very still in the parking garage. "What do you want?" "I want you to think clearly," Gerald said pleasantly. "Whatever Victoria has told you, whatever she's promised you, whatever fantasy the two of you have constructed, I want you to understand the actual shape of the thing you've stepped into. Victoria Langford does not have relationships, Mr. Johnson. She has assets and liabilities. Right now, you're an asset, a prop she's using to win a war with me. The moment that war is over, win or lose, you become a liability. And do you know what Victoria does with liabilities?" A soft sound, almost a laugh. "She eliminates them. I watched her do it to my son. He gave her 5 years of his life, and she discarded him the moment he stopped being useful, and then she rewrote the story so thoroughly that even she believes it now. You're next. You're just too decent to see it coming. And when she's done with you, you'll go back to your 4th floor cubicle and your lean and your sick little girl, and you'll have nothing except the memory of being briefly useful to a woman who was never going to keep you." "You're wrong about her," Caleb said quietly. "Am I?" Gerald's voice didn't change. "I've known her since she was 25. You've known her, 3 weeks? But let's say you're right. Let's say this is real. Here's what I'm offering, Mr. Johnson, and I'd advise you to listen because it's the most generous thing anyone will say to you this year. Walk away, quietly, before the gala. Don't show up. I'll make it worth your while, a transfer to a better position. A raise your lien quietly paid, your daughter's future secured. No one ever has to know we spoke. Or," the warmth left his voice entirely, "stay. Walk into my gala on her arm and make a spectacle of yourself. And I will spend the considerable remainder of my resources making certain that you lose that job, that insurance, that apartment, and the stability your daughter needs. And I will do it slowly and legally, and there will be nothing you can do to stop it. So, asset or liability, your choice. You have 9 days." The line went dead. Caleb stood in the parking garage for a long, long time. He did not call Victoria. That was the first thing he noticed about himself standing there, that his instinct was to protect her from it, to carry it alone, which was exactly the instinct she had, the broke-the-same-way instinct, and he caught himself doing it and hated that he understood it so well. Carry it alone. Don't let them see the wound. Handle it yourself so nobody else has to bleed. He thought about Ava's inhaler on the bathroom counter. He thought about the lien on the car which Gerald should not have known about, which meant Gerald had pulled his actual financials, which meant this was not a bluff. He thought about Victoria laughing into the breadbasket about cherry pie. And he thought about the thing he'd told her on the phone just 2 nights ago. That was the deal. Real on the inside, whatever it costs. We don't lie to each other. He got in his car. He drove back up to the office. And instead of going to his floor, he went up all the way up to the executive floor, past the locked door assistant, who tried to stop him and failed, and he walked into Victoria Langford's office without knocking and shut the door behind him. She looked up, startled. "Caleb, what are you— We said we shouldn't be seen up here. What's—" "Gerald called me," Caleb said. The color drained out of her face. "An hour ago," Caleb went on. "He's got my financials. The lien, the rent, the near layoff, Ava's insurance, all of it. He offered to pay it all off and transfer me somewhere nice if I walk away before the gala. And he promised to destroy me slowly and legally if I don't. He stayed by the door. And the whole drive back up here, I had this voice in my head telling me to handle it myself. Not tell you. Protect you from it. Carry it alone so you wouldn't have to bleed over it." He paused. "And then I remembered I called that exact instinct a 6-year-old survival rule 2 nights ago on the phone to you, so I figured I better not be a hypocrite. So here I am, telling you, whatever it costs." Victoria was on her feet. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing yet. He hung up. But I'm telling you what I'm gonna say, and I'm telling you to your face so you can see I mean it." Caleb crossed the room. He stopped in front of her desk. "I'm not taking his deal. Not the money, not the transfer, not the lien, none of it. And I know what that probably costs me. I've done the math. Victoria, I do that math every single day of my life. I know exactly how thin the margin is between me and losing everything Ava needs. I know. And I'm still not taking it. You want to know why?" "Why?" she breathed. "Because the second I take his money to disappear, I become the exact thing he says I am. A prop. An asset that got bought out. And worse than that, I become the thing that proves him right about you. If I walk away for cash, then everybody who ever said you're a woman nobody actually stays for gets to be right, and I'll be the proof. And I will not be the proof, Victoria. Not for any amount of money. I'd rather lose the apartment." His voice cracked. "I'd rather lose the apartment than be the man who taught you one more time that you were right to never let anybody in." Victoria Langford looked at him, and her eyes were wet, and her hands were shaking, and she said, "You can't. Caleb, you have a daughter. You can't risk her stability for a fake relationship, for a war that isn't even yours. You can't put Ava on the line for me. I won't let you. I won't be the reason that little girl loses her home." "It's not fake," Caleb said. "We established that. Tuesday, on the phone." "Caleb, and it's not your war anymore either. He called me. He pulled my financials. He threatened my daughter by name age 6. The second he did that, it became my war too. So don't tell me it isn't mine. He made it mine when he said her name." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to that gala. Both of us. Together. And I'm gonna stand next to you in this fancy suit. And when Gerald Vance looks at me to see if I took his deal, I'm gonna look him right back in the eye. And he's gonna understand that there are some men in this world he cannot buy. Not every man has a price, Gerald. Some of us already lost the only thing that mattered and learned the hard way that everything else is just stuff. You can't threaten a man with stuff when he's already buried the thing he couldn't live without and survived it. I've got nothing left to be scared of. That's my superpower. It's the only thing grief ever gave me that was worth keeping." Victoria came around the desk. She stood in front of him closer than the arrangement had ever required, and she looked up into his face. "He could actually do it," she said. "What he threatened. He has the resources. He could make your life very hard slowly, legally, exactly like he said. This isn't a bluff, Caleb. I know him. He doesn't bluff." "I know. And you're still going to the gala." "I'm still going to the gala. With me. With you." "Why?" she whispered for what felt like the 100th time, and Caleb finally understood that she wasn't asking because she didn't believe him. She was asking because she needed to hear it one more time before she let herself believe it, the way a person standing at the edge of cold water needs one more breath before they jump. So he gave it to her. He reached up slowly, telling her with his eyes what he was doing before he did it, and he put his hand against the side of her face, the way you touch something you've decided is precious. And he said, "Because somebody should have stayed for you a long time ago, and nobody did. And I'm so tired, Victoria, of watching the right thing not happen to people who deserve it. So I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna be the one who stays. Not because I'm being paid to, not because it's strategic, because I want to. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, between the cherry pie and the sandwiches and the phone calls past midnight, I stopped pretending to fall for you and just... He stopped. His voice had gone rough. Just fell. And I'm not gonna let a man with money tell me I can't keep the first real thing I've felt since I buried my wife. He can take the apartment. He can take the car. He cannot take this. I won't let him. Victoria Langford, who had not been touched gently by another human being in 11 years, who had taught herself that she was a thing nobody stays for, leaned her face into his rough, scarred hand and closed her eyes, and a single tear ran down and over his knuckles. And she said the truest thing she had said in over a decade. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared, Caleb, not of Gerald, of this, of you, of how much of what happens if I let myself and then you're gone. Everybody's always gone. Everybody leaves. My father left, and my mother died, and Tristan... I'm not gonna leave. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that. My mother didn't want to leave either." "You're right." Caleb didn't let go of her face. "I can't promise I'll never die. Nobody gets that promise. I learned that the worst way there is. But I can promise you this, and I mean it down to the bone, I will not choose to leave. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. The people who chose your father, Tristan, they're the ones who taught you. You're unlovable, and they were cowards, and they were wrong. The people who didn't choose your mother, they didn't leave you because of anything about you. The world took them. That's grief, not rejection, and you've been carrying them as the same wound for 11 years, and they are not the same wound." He pressed his forehead gently to hers. "I will never choose to leave you. That's the promise. That's the only one that's mine to make, and I'm making it. Gerald Vance and his money and his 9 days can go straight to hell. And Victoria Langford, the Ice Queen, the untouchable, the woman the whole city feared, stood in her own office in the arms of a logistics manager from the 4th floor. And for the first time in 11 years, she let herself be held by someone she hadn't decided to push away. And she cried, and he held her, and neither of them said anything else for a long time because there was nothing else that needed saying. The gala was 9 days away. Gerald Vance had drawn his line, and down in a parking garage somewhere, a phone sat with a missed call on it belonging to a man who had just discovered for the first time in his cold and calculated life that he had finally found something he could not buy, and that the not buying of it was about to cost him far more than money. The 9 days went fast, the way the time before a reckoning always goes fast. And then it was the night of the gala, and Caleb Johnson was standing in his bathroom again in the charcoal suit, and again Ava was sitting on the edge of the tub. But this time, he didn't lie to her. He'd thought about it for days. He'd promised Victoria the arrangement would stay out of his daughter's life until he decided otherwise, and he'd decided. Because Gerald Vance had said her name. Because a man had pulled his daughter's medical file like a chess piece, and the time for keeping the two halves of his life in separate boxes was over. If this was going to cost him, Ava deserved to know it wasn't a thing that happened to them. It was a thing her father chose. He'd taught her that you don't quit on people. He wasn't about to teach her by hiding that the lesson came with an asterisk. "Ava, come here a second. I want to talk to you about something real." She heard the difference in his voice and went still, climbing down off the tub, and stood in front of him with her serious Supreme Court justice face. "Is it bad?" "No, baby. It's not bad. It's just real, and you're old enough for real." He crouched down. "You remember a few weeks ago you asked if I was going to dinner with a lady. You said it was a work friend having a hard time. That was true. It's still true. Her name is Victoria. She's been having the hardest time for a long time, way before I met her. And the more I helped her, the more I..." He searched for words a 6-year-old could hold. "You know how you've got me, and I've got you, and we're a team. And that's why even when it's hard, we're okay, because we've got each other." "That's what we do," Ava said. "That's what we do." Well, Victoria didn't have anybody, not a team, nobody, for years and years. And that's a real lonely way to live, baby. And I think—" He took a breath. "I think she might get to be on our team, if that's okay with you. Not today, not all at once, but someday maybe. I wanted to ask you because you're the most important person in my whole life, and I don't make team decisions without my team." Ava considered this with enormous gravity. "Does she make you check the mirror?" she said. Caleb laughed, surprised, his eyes stinging. Yeah, she kind of does." "Is she nice to you?" "She is. She's nicer than she thinks she is. She just had people be mean to her for so long she forgot." Ava nodded, slowly processing this, with the deep wisdom of someone who'd recently mastered tying her own shoes. "Mommy would want you to have a team," she said. "Mommy didn't like when you were sad alone. She told me once. Before." Caleb's whole chest caved in. You remember her telling you that?" "A little. I remember she said take care of Daddy when he's sad alone, because he forgets people can help him." Ava looked up at him with Maya's eyes. Maya's exact eyes, and Caleb had to hold himself very still to keep from coming apart on the bathroom floor. "So if the lady helps you not be sad alone, then I think she should be on the team. I'm doing what Mommy said." Caleb pulled his daughter into his arms and held her hard, his face in her hair, and for a moment he couldn't speak at all. "You are the best thing I ever did," he finally managed. "You know that, in my whole life. The best thing." "I know," Ava said, muffled against his shoulder, supremely confident, and he laughed through the tears. And that was how it should be, he thought. That was exactly how it should be. He dropped her at Mrs. Okafor's. He drove to the gala. And the whole way there, he carried his daughter's blessing in his chest like a lit coal, warm against the cold dread of what was waiting. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was the kind of event Caleb had only ever seen in movies. Marble chandeliers, a sea of people who had never once in their lives worried about a lien. Victoria was waiting for him at the top of the steps, and when he saw her, every coherent thought left his head. "You look—" He stopped. "There aren't words. I had words in the car. They're gone." "You clean up too," she said, but her voice was tight, and he knew her well enough now to read the fear under it. "He's here," Caleb said. "Not a question. He's here, both of them, and the entire board, and half the people who matter in this city, and every one of them has heard some version of the story by now." She took a breath. "Caleb, it's not too late. You can still walk away. I mean it. If you go in there on my arm tonight, and he does what he promised—" "Victoria, I will never forgive myself. I will never forgive myself if Ava loses her home because of Victoria." Caleb took both her hands. "I talked to Ava tonight. Told her everything. The real version." The fear in her face cracked into something else. "You what did she?" "She said her mom told her once to take care of me when I'm sad alone. And she said if you help me not be sad alone, you should be on the team." His voice was steady and his eyes were not. "A 6-year-old gave us her blessing tonight, Victoria, quoting her dead mother. So no, I'm not walking away. I've got a team of 2 that just voted to make it 3, and I don't lose votes like that to a man with a checkbook. Now take my arm. We're going in. And we're going in like we mean it because we do." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and something in her steadied, not the armor, something underneath it, something real that had finally decided to stop being afraid. She took his arm. They walked in together. The room noticed. Of course it noticed. Heads turned, conversations dipped, the particular hush of a crowd that has been waiting for a show and just watched the curtain rise. Caleb felt the eyes and didn't flinch. He'd faced down a state trooper with his hat in his hands. He'd buried his wife, he'd scrubbed juice off a floor at dawn so his life wouldn't fall apart. A room full of rich people staring was nothing, was less than nothing. He walked Victoria through it with his head up and his hand steady over hers on his arm, and she felt the steadiness and borrowed from it, and together they were something the room could not quite categorize and could not look away from. They found Gerald near the center of it. He'd positioned himself there deliberately. Caleb understood a spider at the middle of his web, where everyone could see whatever was about to happen. Tristan stood at his shoulder with a champagne flute and a smile that had already started to curdle. "Victoria." Gerald's voice was warm for the audience glacial underneath. "You came, and you brought your—" His eyes moved to Caleb, slow, deliberate a man, checking whether his money had done its work. "Your guest." "Gerald." Victoria's voice didn't waver. "You remember Caleb?" "We spoke on the phone," Gerald said, watching Caleb's face. "Briefly. I made him a rather generous offer. I confess I'm surprised to see him here." A pause calculated public. I'd assumed a sensible man with his particular circumstances would have made a sensible choice. There it was. The threat dressed up for the room, his particular circumstances, the lean and the daughter, and the thin margin all folded into 3 velvet words, a knife in a silk sleeve. Around them, people leaned in. This was the show they'd come for. And Caleb Johnson smiled. "You did make me a generous offer," he said, and he said it loud enough to carry loud enough that the leaning crowd could hear every word. "You offered to pay off my debts and move me to a nice quiet job if I'd disappear before tonight. And you promised to ruin me slowly and legally if I didn't." He let that hang in the suddenly silent air. "I figured I'd save you the trouble of wondering, so I'll just tell everybody right now. The answer's no. You can't buy me, Gerald. And you can't scare me either, and I'll tell you exactly why since you went to all the trouble of pulling my financials." Gerald's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "3 years ago I buried my wife," Caleb said to Gerald, to the room, to all of it. "Car accident. Left me with a little girl and a hole in my chest the size of the world. And a man who's been through that learned something most of you in this room have been lucky enough to never learn. He learns that everything you tried to threaten me with tonight, the money, the apartment, the job, the stuff, it's just stuff. I already lost the only thing that ever actually mattered to me. You can't hold the rest over a man's head when he's already survived losing the one thing he'd have traded all of it for. You've got no leverage on me, Gerald. I'm the one man in this room you forgot how to threaten because I already paid the worst price there is and I'm still standing. So keep your money. Keep your threats. I don't want them." The room was dead silent now. Phones were up. The same phones that had nearly destroyed Victoria in a bar 3 weeks ago, but this time they were recording something else entirely. "How noble!" Tristan cut in, his curdled smile widening because Tristan was a coward and cowards always reach for the cruelest thing when they're losing. "Truly. The grieving widower riding to the rescue. It's very moving, Mr. Johnson, but let's be honest about what this actually is. Shall we? You're a 4th-floor nobody. She picked up in a bar because she needed a date and a sob story. You're not her partner, you're her prop. And the second this little war is over, she'll throw you back exactly where she found you, the way she threw me back, the way she throws everyone back, because Victoria Langford doesn't keep people. She uses them. That's enough, Tristan." Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. "And the saddest part," Tristan barreled on, drunk now on his own venom, "is that you actually believe it. You actually think a woman like her could love a man like you. Look at you. Look at her. It's pathetic." I said that's enough. It wasn't loud exactly. It was worse than loud. It was the sound of 11 years of armor coming off in one motion, and the whole room felt it, and Tristan's mouth snapped shut. Victoria Langford stepped forward out from under Caleb's arm, standing on her own, and she faced the man she'd almost married, and the father who'd spent 5 years trying to destroy her, and she did the thing her mother had taught her never to do. She showed them the wound. "You want to talk about what I do to people, Tristan? Fine. Let's, in front of everyone. Let's talk about it." Her voice shook, and she let it shake, and somehow the shaking made it stronger, not weaker. "You're right that I throw people away. You're right about that. For 11 years I have kept every single human being on this earth at arm's length, and I have told myself it was strength, and it was not strength, it was fear. And a man taught me that 3 weeks ago, a 4th-floor nobody as you call him, who saw more of me in one night than you saw in 5 years of pretending to love me." The room did not breathe. "You ask how a woman like me could love a man like him." Victoria turned and looked at Caleb, and her eyes were streaming now openly in front of the board. The press, the whole shining, cruel city, and she didn't wipe them away. I'll tell you how. He's the only person who ever looked at the worst, most broken, most frightened part of me, the part I've spent my whole life making sure nobody could see, and instead of using it against me the way you're using it right now, the way your father has used it for years, he sat down next to it. He said, "There she is." Finally. He brought me bread when I cried. He sent me pictures of his sandwich to make sure I ate. He told me my mother was wrong about one thing. Just one, the thing that's been killing me for 11 years, and he was right. So you ask how a woman like me could love a man like him? Her voice broke completely. I don't love him because of his money or his floor or his title. Tristan, that's your arithmetic. I love him because he's the first person in my entire life who made me believe I was a person worth staying for. And that is worth more than everything in this room. Everything your father owns. Everything you ever offered me. That is what love actually is. You never knew. You still don't. And I almost died never knowing either. She turned away from him entirely. She walked back to Caleb, and she stood in front of him, and the whole room watched the Ice Queen of Langford Dynamics reach up with both shaking hands and take a fourth-floor logistics manager's face between her palms. "You kept asking me why you'd do this for me," she said only to him now, the rest of the room gone. "And I kept not believing the answer. So now it's my turn. You want to know why I'm doing this? Why I'm burning my whole careful life down in front of every person who matters in this city for you?" A tear fell. "Because somebody should have stayed for you too. Caleb Johnson, you've spent 3 years being the one who stays for everybody else, and nobody ever stayed for you. And tonight I'm staying. I'm choosing you, in front of everyone. Not as a prop, not as a strategy, as the man I love. And I dare anyone in this room to tell me I'm not allowed." And then Victoria Langford, who had not kissed a man because she meant it in over a decade, broke her own oldest rule in front of the entire world. She kissed him. The fake relationship died in that kiss. Everyone in the room felt it die, felt the thing that replaced it, the real thing, undeniable, the kind you cannot stage. Caleb's arms came around her, and he kissed her back like a man who'd been drowning for 3 years and just broke the surface. And somewhere in the crowd, somebody actually started to clap. And then somebody else. And the phones recorded all of it, the whole impossible thing, the CEO and the widower choosing each other in the middle of a war. When they broke apart, foreheads together, both crying, Caleb whispered, "Your daughter's gonna love you." "What?" "Ava. She voted you onto the team. Welcome to the team." Victoria laughed a wet, broken, beautiful laugh and pressed her face into his neck, and for a moment the gala didn't exist at all. But it did exist. And so did Gerald Vance. "Touching," Gerald said. His voice had lost all its warmth now. The audience version was gone, and what was left was pure cold steel. Genuinely touching. Enjoy it. Because Monday morning, Victoria, you'll discover that this performance changes nothing about the numbers, the board, or the very precarious position you've put yourself in. You've just shown every shareholder in this room that the CEO of this company makes decisions with her heart instead of her head. You've handed me the exact narrative I've been trying to build for 2 years, and you did it yourself on camera for free. You think you won tonight. You've never been weaker. The board meets Monday, and this time I promise you there will be a vote. He set down his champagne. You've just kissed away your company, Victoria. I hope he was worth it. He turned to leave. His son moved to follow, and it was Caleb who stopped them. "Mr. Vance." Gerald paused. "Before you go." Caleb's voice was calm now, the calm of a man who'd been thinking very carefully for 9 days. "You said something on the phone that stuck with me. You said you make it your business to know things, so I figured I'd make it my business too. See, I work in logistics. I move things. I track things. I'm real good at following a trail from one place to another, and I had 9 days and a lot of motivation." He reached into his jacket and took out a phone, and on it was a document. "Vance Holdings has been short-selling Langford Dynamics stock for 14 months. Quietly. Through 3 shell entities, which by itself is just aggressive business. But here's the part your board doesn't know, and the SEC would find very interesting. Somebody's been feeding selective negative information about Victoria to specific shareholders, timed to those short positions to drive the price down on purpose. Manufactured panic. To buy low. The numbers you've been using to question her leadership. Some of them weren't real. You made them look worse than they were on a schedule that lines up with your trades, and you did it from a board seat, which is about 6 different kinds of illegal. The room, which had thought the show was over, leaned back in. Gerald's face had gone gray. "That's a fabrication. You have no—" "I've got the trail," Caleb said. "Took me 9 days. It's not proof a court would need yet. I'm a logistics guy, not a lawyer. But it's enough to hand to the SEC and the board and let them pull the threads. And here's the thing, Gerald." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped just for the two of them, but the room was so silent it carried anyway. "You tried to buy a man who already lost everything he was scared of losing. That was your mistake. You looked at my lien and my apartment and my sick little girl, and you thought that's a man with too much to lose to fight me. But you had it exactly backwards. A man with that much on the line and a daughter to protect, that's the most dangerous man in any room because he is motivated, and he does not stop, and he does not get tired because every single thing he does for her. You threatened my daughter by name. So I spent 9 days learning how to end you, and I did." He stepped back. "Tell the board to meet Monday, please. I'd love for them to." For a long moment, Gerald Vance simply stared at him, at this fourth-floor nobody who had just turned a threat inside out and handed it back with the blade, reversed exactly the way Victoria had done to Tristan in the boardroom 3 weeks ago, and the symmetry of it was not lost on anyone. Then, without a word, Gerald Vance turned and walked out of his own gala, and his son scrambled after him, and the spider left the center of his web with the whole city watching him go. The room erupted. Caleb didn't hear most of it. He turned to Victoria, who was staring at him with her mouth open, mascara everywhere, the single most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. 9 days, she said faintly. "You spent the 9 days. You really thought I was just going to show up in a nice suit and hope for the best." Caleb almost smiled. "I'm a single father, Victoria. We don't hope for the best. We plan for the worst, and we show up early. He came after my kid. Did he really think I'd just take a stand and lose? I don't take stands. I win. I have to. There's a 6-year-old counting on it." And Victoria Langford laughed and cried and grabbed his face and kissed him again right there. And this time the whole room was clapping and the phones were recording. And somewhere out in the city, the story was already beginning to spread. Not the story Gerald had wanted, not the cracking CEO, but a different one entirely, a better one. The one about the widower and the Ice Queen, and the night they chose each other in front of everyone. It was, Caleb thought, holding her the kind of night Maya would have loved. He could almost hear her. "That's what we do, Caleb. We don't quit on people. We clean it up and we keep going. And we don't do it alone. Not anymore. Not anymore." Across the room, the board members were already gathering in tight knots, and Caleb knew, even in the middle of the kiss, even in the middle of the impossible joy of it, that Monday was still coming. The vote was still coming. Gerald Vance did not walk out of a room like that and simply vanish. Men like that regrouped, and the document on Caleb's phone was a beginning, not an ending. And the war for Victoria's company was about to move from a ballroom into a boardroom where Caleb Johnson had no seat and no vote and no power at all. But that was Monday. Tonight, a man who had taught himself for 3 years to feel nothing held a woman who had taught herself for 11 years to need no one, and both of them, at exactly the same time, in the middle of a marble room full of strangers, finally let go of the lie they'd each been telling. And neither one of them was alone. Monday came the way it always came, too early, and this time with 2 sets of footsteps in Caleb's apartment instead of 1. Victoria had not stayed the night. They weren't there yet, and both of them knew that a 6-year-old's heart needed to be brought along slowly. But she'd come at dawn before the board meeting because Caleb had asked her to, because there was a thing he wanted to do before the war moved into the boardroom, and it could not wait. Ava stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, eyeing the tall woman in the sharp suit with the frank, unblinking assessment that only small children can perform. "You're the lady," Ava said. Victoria, who had stared down boards and billionaires and never once felt her stomach drop the way it dropped, now crouched down to the floor, the way she'd watched Caleb do, so she wasn't looking down at the child, but across at her. "I'm the lady," she agreed. "My name is Victoria. Your dad talks about you all the time. He says you're the best thing he ever did." "I am," Ava confirmed. Then tilting her head, "Are you the one who makes him check the mirror?" Victoria laughed, startled, her eyes going bright. Yes. Apparently I'm the one who makes him check the mirror." Ava nodded, slowly processing, and then she walked right up to Victoria and looked at her very closely, very seriously, the way she looked at her father when he was sad alone. "My mommy said to take care of Daddy when he's sad," Ava said. "Are you going to help me do that? Because it's a big job. It's too big for just me." And Victoria Langford, the Ice Queen, the untouchable, the woman who'd spent 11 years certain she was a thing nobody stays for, knelt on a worn kitchen floor in front of a 6-year-old and felt the very last brick of the wall her mother had taught her to build come loose and fall away entirely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, baby. I'm going to help you do that. It's a big job, but there's 2 of us now, and 2 is enough." Ava considered this. Then she put her small arms around Victoria's neck just for a second. A quick, fierce hug, the kind that's over before you're ready for it, and she stepped back and announced, "Okay, you're on the team," and walked off to find her shoes, as if she hadn't just rebuilt a grown woman from the foundation up. Caleb stood in the doorway watching, and he had to put his hand over his mouth. And when Victoria looked up at him from the floor with tears streaming down her face, he just shook his head slowly, because there were no words, there had never been words, for the things that mattered most. "That's the team," he said roughly. "That's the whole team. That's everything I've got right there. And it just voted you in unanimously." Victoria stood, wiped her face, and for one moment let herself simply be held by him in the kitchen while a 6-year-old hunted for light-up sneakers in the next room. "I have to go to war now," she said into his chest. "I know. Gerald's going to fight. The document you found buys us a beginning, not a win. He'll have lawyers, he'll have a story. And I have to walk into that room and hold the company my mother built, and I have to do it without you because you're not on the board and you can't be in that room. I know that too." Caleb pulled back enough to look at her. "But here's what you've got that you didn't have 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, you walked into that room alone with your mother's voice in your head telling you to never let them see you bleed. Today you walk in with a different voice. Mine. And it's telling you the opposite. Bleed if you have to. Stand anyway. And know that whatever happens in that room, win, lose, vote, goes either way. There's a man and a little girl on the east side of the city who are yours, and we don't quit and we don't leave, and we'll be here when you get home no matter what the board decides. The company's a thing you might lose, Victoria. We're not. Get that straight before you walk in there, and you've already won the only fight that actually matters." Victoria closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fear was still there, but it had something underneath it now, something load-bearing. "Say it one more time," she said. "The thing you keep saying. I think I finally believe it, but say it one more time." Caleb took her face in his hands. "You're not a cold thing," he said. "And you never were. And before this is over, the whole world's gonna know it. Now go take back your mother's company, and come home to us when it's done." She went. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Caleb didn't hear it secondhand for days. And when he finally did, it was Victoria who told him late at night, exhausted and triumphant, lying with her head in his lap while Ava slept down the hall. She told him how Gerald had come in armed lawyers, a prepared statement the gala footage edited to make her look unstable, a motion for a no-confidence vote already drafted. She told him how for the first hour it had gone exactly the way Gerald wanted the board, nervous the narrative taking hold, the Ice Queen who kissed a stranger and burned her judgment down in public. And then she told him how she'd stopped trying to win the way her mother would have won. "I didn't fight him with numbers," she said. "That's what he expected. That's what I always did. Instead, I put your document on the table. The short selling, the shell companies, the manufactured panic timed to his trade's run from his own board seat. And I looked at every person at that table, and I said, 'You've spent 2 years wondering if I was strong enough to lead this company. The real question you should have been asking is why the man telling you I wasn't has been secretly betting against us the whole time. He didn't think I was weak. He knew I was about to recover, and he needed you to believe I was weak so he could buy us cheap before I did. I'm not the liability in this room. He is. And I have the trail.'" "What did they do?" Caleb asked quietly, stroking her hair. "They voted." She smiled, tired and fierce. "Just not the vote Gerald wanted. They voted to remove him from the board, pending an SEC inquiry. They voted to refer the short selling to the regulators. And then," her voice caught, "then the chairman, this old man who served with my mother, who I've been terrified of my whole career. He looked at me and he said, 'Your mother would be proud of you, Victoria, not for the numbers, for finally letting us see you.' And I lost it, Caleb, right there in the boardroom. I cried, in front of all of them. And nobody flinched. Nobody used it against me. They just waited. And then we got back to work." She laughed wetly. 11 years. 11 years I was sure that the second they saw me bleed, they'd take everything. And it turns out the bleeding was the thing that finally made them trust me. Gerald Vance left the company in disgrace within the month. The SEC inquiry was slow, the way those things are, but the short-selling scheme unraveled exactly the way the logistics manager's trail had said it would, thread by thread, and Vance Holdings's attempt to take Langford Dynamics collapsed with it. Tristan disappeared from the social pages, then from the city entirely. The story the Gallophones had captured spread far beyond what Gerald had imagined, but it spread the right way, the human way, the CEO and the widower, the Ice Queen, who let herself be loved, and where Gerald had wanted a scandal, there was instead something the public rarely got and could not get enough of, which was a true thing plainly told about two broken people choosing each other in the middle of a war. The recovery he'd tried to prevent came in Q3 exactly as her numbers had always promised. The company didn't just survive, it thrived. And Victoria Langford ran it differently after that. Not softer exactly. She was never going to be soft, but open, a leader who had learned that the wound you let people see is the wound that finally heals, and that a person at the top who bleeds and stands anyway is stronger than any armor her mother had ever taught her to wear. But that was the company. That was the smaller story. The bigger one happened slowly on the east side of the city, in a small apartment that gradually stopped being small enough. It happened in pieces, the way real things do. The first time Victoria stayed for dinner instead of just coffee. The first time she did Ava's hair badly, and Ava patiently redid it herself, and then hugged her anyway for trying. The first time Caleb came home to find the two of them on the couch with a book between them, Victoria reading aloud in the careful voice of a woman who had never read aloud to a child in her life, and was terrified of getting it wrong. And Ava correcting her pronunciation with the bossy tenderness of a 6-year-old, who had decided this person was hers to keep. It happened the first morning Caleb woke up and reached over, and she was there, and he lay still for a long moment in the gray light, and he did the thing he did. On hard mornings, he talked to Maya, but for the first time it wasn't a hard morning, and what he said wasn't "help me get through this." It was "thank you. You told her to take care of me." She did. She found someone to help. "We're okay, Maya. We're finally okay. You can rest now. We've got it from here." And he was certain, in a way he couldn't explain, and didn't try to, that somewhere she heard him, and that she was glad. There was a Saturday, almost a year after the bar, when Caleb loaded Ava into the 11-year-old sedan, the lean, long since paid off by his own work on his own terms. He'd never let Victoria touch it, and Victoria climbed into the passenger seat, where she'd once wept in front of a stranger, and Caleb drove them out of the city, way out off the highway, hunting for a diner that may or may not still exist. It existed. Cracked vinyl booths and all. "It's still here," Victoria whispered, her hand against the window. "Caleb, it's still here." "Course it is," he said. "Some things last. You just gotta go back and check." They sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the three of them, and Victoria ordered cherry pie and let Ava have a bite, which was a thing she had never once let anyone do, not in her whole life, because cherry was hers, and watching her daughter, who wasn't yet her daughter, take a forkful of the pie her own dead mother used to try to steal. Victoria Langford understood that she'd finally figured out the thing her mother never could. That the pie isn't sweeter when it's only yours. That the whole point was always the sharing. That a thing held alone, no matter how precious, is just a thing, and a thing shared becomes a home. On the drive back, Ava fell asleep in the booster seat, and Victoria reached over and turned on the radio, and let the little sleeping girl's father pick the station, and looked out the window at the city lights coming up over the horizon, and thought about how far she'd come from the woman who'd grabbed a stranger's wrist in a bar and threatened to fire him because she could not bear to be alone for one more night. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his eyes on the road, his hand finding hers across the seat. "That night in the bar," she said, "when I grabbed your wrist. I keep thinking about how close I came to not doing it. To just going home alone the way I always did. To being too proud, too armored, too afraid. One more lonely night out of 11 years of them." Her fingers tightened around his. "And I think about how the whole rest of my life was on the other side of that one stupid, desperate, impossible reach. Everything. You, her, this, all of it was right there, one wrist away, and I almost didn't reach." "But you did," Caleb said. "But I did. That's the thing about the worst nights of our lives," he said quietly. "Sometimes they're the door. Mine was a state trooper on my porch with his hat in his hands, the worst night I ever had. And I'd have given anything to undo it, but if it hadn't happened, I'd have never learned how to stay for people. And if I'd never learned that, I'd have never walked across that bar. The worst night I ever had built the man who could save you. And the worst night you ever had, the one in the bar, your pride in pieces, that monster taking you apart in public. That's the night that finally cracked you open enough to let somebody in." He glanced at her. "I'm not saying the bad nights are good. They're not. I'd give Maya back in a heartbeat and damn the lesson. But I am saying that sometimes the door to the whole rest of your life is disguised as the worst thing that ever happened to you. And the only way through it is to reach, even when you're sure there's nothing on the other side. Especially then." Victoria looked at this man, this widowed father with the scarred hands and the iron spine, and the heart he'd somehow kept soft through 3 years of grief. This man who'd walked across a crowded bar to stand between her and a wolf, when 40 floors of people who answered to her would not, and she understood finally and completely the thing she'd spent her whole life getting wrong. Home had never been her office on the 40th floor. It had never been the company her mother built, or the apartment with the doorman and the view, or any of the cold, beautiful things she'd accumulated to fill a silence she'd stopped even noticing. Home was the man whose hand she was holding. Home was the little girl asleep in the back seat who'd put her arms around a stranger's neck and said, "You're on the team." Home was a cracked vinyl booth and a slice of cherry pie shared 3 ways. Home was a person, 2 people, a team of 3, found in the unlikeliest place by the unlikeliest reach on the worst night of a lonely life. She'd spent 36 years believing she was a cold thing and that cold things don't get to be loved, that they just get to be left. She had been wrong about every part of it. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. Take me home." He smiled, the real one, the tired, true one she'd fallen for a year ago in the cab of this same car. "Baby," he said, "you're already there." And she was. For the first time in her entire life, Victoria Langford was already home. Not because she'd arrived at a place, but because she was sitting beside the person who was one with a sleeping child in the back, and a radio playing low, and a city full of lights rising up to meet them. The widowed father who'd taught himself to feel nothing had learned to feel again. The frozen woman who'd taught herself to need no one had learned to let herself be held. And the 2 of them against a man with all the money in the world, against 11 years of armor, and 3 years of grief, against every voice that had ever told either of them they were too broken to be loved, had chosen each other not by accident, not in desperation, but on purpose. Eyes open, knowing exactly what it cost, and paying it gladly. That is the whole truth of it, and it does not bend for anyone. Home was never a place. It was a person. And the moment two lonely people stopped being too afraid to reach for each other, they were never ever alone again.